another episode of Gracias, Come Again. Today, we're sitting down with a pillar of our community, an icon, a media maven, a commissioner, a former New York State secretary, a journalist, an author. Can this list get any longer, lady? Welcome, Rossana Rosado.
Thank you.
How amazing is it to hear all those titles and all those accolades? Does it still kind of phase you, or you're just like, yeah, that's just me?
I mean, both. It's just me, but also, I guess it is impressive.
I'm impressed.
I've made use of the time that I've had.
Have you?
Yes.
Welcome, Bronx Attitude. We have a new memoir out.
Yes.
We're telling our whole story. What are we doing?
Not the whole story.
What do you mean not the whole story? You
Well,
holding back on us, Commissioner?
I wrote this memoir, and it ends in 2013 when I left my CEO job. When I was publisher and CEO of El Diario. So I ended there. So there are many more stories to tell, but this book was really about kind of 1/3 was growing up, how I grew up in the Bronx. And the second third is really about my career in media in New York. You know how they always tell you have to leave town and make it somewhere else and then come back, but I wanted to make it in New York. And then the last third is really about how my experience as a CEO kind of mirrored the growth of the Latino community, running a newspaper that was in Spanish and that was about, it was not just about covering the community, but it was about also kind of struggling with them, for all the things we had to fight for. So that's in the book.
Let's start right from the beginning. The Bronx. That's born and raised?
Born and raised.
BX, baby. Can I talk about the cover of the book, how you threw up your ex? And I was like, I already like her. I said, the face gives for nice, sweet, kind of serious, but then when you had the gesture, the two arms in front of you, I said, I could rock with her.
Thank you. I was at a photo shoot, and then we said, let's do some of the, with the ex, and it turned out that was the picture everyone loved.
I love it.
Everyone fell in love with, and I really do. I wrote this book, and I really wanted to pay homage to the Bronx because, when you're working in Manhattan, we all struggle. We all have the struggle, get into Manhattan, get into places that really weren't made for us, get into spaces that we're not used to. And when you say you're from the Bronx, people make all kinds of assumptions.
I'm so sick of the jokes.
And even when you say you're from Queens, you're from Brooklyn, people, they already try to peg you. And so I think in my early career, it used to bother me, and I'd be like, yeah, no, you don't know me. You don't know who I am. But then when I was in my 30s, I decided, I'm going to use that. People think you're from the Bronx and they might be scared of you. I want them to be scared of me because I want to, make it in this media world. And, it wasn't easy. I'm sure that that it's not easy because there weren't spaces that were necessarily that we were welcomed into.
It wasn't built for us.
It wasn't.
But here we are.
But here we are.
Isn't that beautiful?
I think it's wonderful and it's inspirational. And I knew somewhere along the line, I taught, when I left El Diario, I taught at John Jay College in New York, the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and I found out from my students, who were many Latinos, from everywhere, a lot of Dominican, Mexican, I found out that they hadn't read any Latino authors and they hadn't read Latino stories, right? So they were made to feel like their story wasn't worthy. And so I'll tell you that on the first day of class, I would give a quiz. It was like 10 true or false. And the first question was, or it wasn't a question, it was like, immigrants commit the most crimes in this country. And many of my students would say true. And then I would say, but you come from a family, right? Your parents are from DR, so are they criminals? No. And I said, so why would you answer true? They have been so affected, right, by the media images that they weren't speaking their own truth. Anyway, all of that made me passionate about telling our stories because we assume that, the kids know, the next generation knows, but they don't know. So I think, so now I'm on now this book is important for me, in telling my story, but I want to use it as a way to get other people, to tell their stories.
We're going to talk about that because I saw that, why your story matters. And, the workshop, how to get started, telling your story. And I was like, this is something we got to talk about. We're going to talk about it off air. We're going to talk about it on air, but we're going to talk about it off air too. Now, born in the Bronx to Puerto Rican parents?
Yes.
How was that? How was growing up in the Bronx?
I mean, I grew up in a family it was an extended family, right? So I have family upstairs, downstairs, across the driveway.
House.
So my grandfather bought this 3-family house, and then he bought the one next door. So now you have 6 apartments.
Oh, we don't have vision.
And one gate. They put a lock on the gate. So all the kids were in that driveway. So you had the run of the houses and the driveway. You just couldn't come out without adult supervision out of that gate. And then eventually he bought the house across the street. So he had 3 houses.
Come
right?
on, abuelo.
And
I
so
love this.
so he said, this is how you make it in this country. You need a place to live and you need a place to work. So he bought bodegas. He had 2 bodegas at one time. So all the men in our family, my uncles, who were my father's brothers, and my dad, who was the in-law, they all worked in the bodegas. So, when you're a kid and you have shelter and you have a bodega, so you have food, goodies. My father would, when he came home from the bodega in the night, he always came home with a bag, and there were always goodies in there for us. There were 4 of us. And so we never knew hunger, right? So we thought we were cool. We thought we were rich. And that was my grandfather's vision, to make sure that the family had a place to live and a place to work. And then everything else could grow from there.
And we thank, parents and grandparents that had that vision, because, some of our parents didn't. They came here, they worked, they built nothing. So it's just like your grandfather, he had the foresight. And do you feel like that was an advantage that you were given?
I think so. I mean, I didn't know right until later. And even as I was writing this book was when I really came to appreciate his vision, right? Because it's not something he talked about. He just felt it was his role, A, to take care of the family, and B, what is really special to me and what makes me, emotional is for many of our families, there's that generation. I guess I feel like they knew that they would not see the fruits of the labor, but they toiled anyway so that we could be here today. Here you are in a radio studio, in Manhattan, and here's, this career I've had, and that would not have happened without these decisions that were made by the elders who said, I'm going to leave my home, I'm going to leave this beautiful beach, and I'm going to go to New York City and make a better life. And so I think that's also part of the story, is that, sometimes people say, oh, you come from the Bronx, you come from nothing. But we don't come from nothing. We come from extreme sacrifice and kind of purpose. He knew that the next generation would be great. And I'm sorry he died when I was in college, and he didn't get to see the success that he basically sembró, right?
Claro que sí, because, it all starts with our home life, If your home life is not supportive, if it's broken, or if you have a parent that is constantly throwing you out of your house, that's when, as a teen and as a young adult, we tend to lose ourselves. So, abuelo setting things in motion.
Yes. And he wasn't perfect. There was my tangle with him was that I always thought I would be able to work at the bodega like my cousins, but my older cousins were male. I'm like the 4th or 5th oldest. And so when I was getting tall enough, I said, Papa, I'm ready to work in the bodega. He's like, no, la bodega no es para niñas. And I'm like, what? What do you mean the bodega is not for girls? And he's like, no, you don't see your mother working here. You don't see your grandmother here.
He's like, he had the foresight. He was like, she's going to be a journalist. She's going to be an author. She's going to be a commissioner. Pa' fuera. No venga a trabajar para ninguna bodega.
Yeah, that's what he said. No, this is not a place. So, but it also made me kind of battle. All my life, I've always been battling for women's rights. And it started with this thing with my grandfather when I was just 8. I knew he was wrong, and I had to prove to him that women could do things. And so that also set off in a way. You're right. Maybe he was just trying to, put me on a different path. But he was like, yeah, not here.
When you think back, it's like at 8 years old, could you have worked at a bodega?
I mean, really, I thought I could. I was precocious,
Yeah, but that's also a personality trait of us women that end up leading and end up being bigger than, others in our family. We're bien freca desde temprano.
Yeah, they always call me presenta.
That's a good one. Bien presenta.
Bien presenta. And I always and I felt, again, in writing the book, I remember all these things, but I always reveled in the attention of the adults, when they were like, oh, she's smart and she can speak and she speaks Spanish. And, they always celebrated, they said I was a smart cookie, and I believed it, so I was very encouraged by my family.
And that's super helpful. Because if you're living in a home where people are knocking you down and telling you you're nothing and you're never going to make it,
that is hard to transcend.
You mad cute. I'm looking at this picture of you right now. Que linda.
My second grade picture. That's my favorite picture because I was so
hair.
happy. Yes.
No, you do look happy. You parece que you already knew you was going to be lit in this life. Now, college years. Did you immediately know I'm going into media? The media was like your thing right away? I
mean, I was always interested in media, but I didn't know about journalism. So when I went to college, I was an English major. I wanted to write books. I always wanted to write books. This is why this is so important. This is my first book. But
journalism.
I was going to write books. And my the head of the department called me in at the end of the semester, and she said, "You're an English major," and I said, "Yes, that's my favorite subject." And she said, "What are you going to do with an English degree?" I said, "I'm going to teach English." And she said, "You can't teach English because you have an accent." And I was like, "No, I don't." I thought she meant a Spanish accent, but I think she meant a Bronx accent. And so I didn't have the vocabulary with which to defend myself at that time. So I remember I said to her, but I want to write. And she goes, "Oh, that's journalism." I said, "Okay." And I switched my major to journalism. So I would say that was like the best bad advice I ever got, because then I discovered this whole world of journalism, which was really at the base, a career that is about talking to people and telling the story, right? And I love that, that the ability that I could actually get paid to talk to people and tell their stories.
Here we are.
And write those stories. And so then I was passionate about journalism, and I was a journalism major. I had a minor in Spanish.
And then where did we pivot to criminal justice? Because in reading your story.
That's way later in my career.
Oh, it is way later in your career.
Yeah, way later in my career. I mean, I had a 30-year career in media. I worked in television and radio, and then.
So at no point was criminal justice part of those 30 years?
Not really, not until the end.
So you really pivoted at the end.
Yeah, so I
Let's talk media then, because that's my thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk
well,
media.
Paul, I love to talk about criminal justice, but what I like to say about journalism, journalists are like great dinner party guests, because we know a little bit about a lot of things, right? The cover of the paper, the sports, a little bit about everything. But in my late career, I wanted to have a deep dive knowledge of something, and I became very interested in criminal justice, and I'll tell you why. But my career in media was amazing, because I got to go out there as a reporter. I covered the Bronx, I covered East Harlem.
I saw that you
during
were
the Koch administration. They would call it in El Diario, they were like a patear calle, and it was like really, and I'm talking about the 80s, when you had to carry a roll of quarters so you could call in on a payphone. We didn't have cell phones.
The struggle was real.
The struggle was so real. I had a beeper, and in El Diario we had the cheapest beeper, so it had it just set off a signal, but it didn't have a number that you could call back. So you had to call the switchboard. And on the switchboard there was a lady, Daisy, and you would call in and say, "Alguien me llamó," and then she'd be like, "¿Quién llamó, Rosana?" And then whoever called you would get on the phone. So those, and we had no laptops. You had to go to the Bronx, cover the story, get back downtown to write it, on a computer system that's not like what we have now. And still, I loved it.
Was it the excitement of it all?
I don't know. I loved being in them. There was one night when I was in this story, and it started to rain, and all the reporters were there, like the TV reporters, and I had this Panasonic tape recorder that I used, and my sister was waiting for me. She was in the car. It was at the corner of Castle Hill Avenue, and there was this late-breaking story. And as I was standing there, I thought, this is crazy, right? I'm getting wet. There's all the reporters, all the reporters are on one story, they call it a gangbang. Everybody's there trying to get, the quote. And I knew in that moment that I loved it. It didn't make any sense, but I love this. I love the action. I love the
you had that adrenaline
kind of like the breaking news kind of thing, and getting that story. And then I'd get in the car, get home, call it in. In those days, again, we didn't have all the tools we have today. I think for everyone, there's a moment where you're like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing because I love it, and it doesn't make sense for me to love it.
You in the streets, ahí todo mojado, te estaba lloviendo.
Yes.
You're hustling, trying to get your
hair getting all frizzy.
And you're like, I love this shit.
And I'm like, why do I love it? I don't know, but I love it. And also, it was an important time, in the 80s for our community. There was so being a reporter at El Diario was also special, because you were covering stories that really affected, people who look like you. So you go in and, at the time, I remember when I was a reporter in the Bronx, people's kids were being taken away by ACS. People's didn't have gas. They didn't have the gas working in their buildings. The landlords were trying to get rid of people. And so there was like Thanksgiving, they didn't have gas, and I was, writing all these stories about people's struggles in housing, with the city agencies, and with, abandoned lots and stuff, things that the city didn't care about. And so I worked for an editor at the time who was my mentor, and he would have us publish pictures of, let's say, the dirty lot. Nos preocupa, like this has to be solved. And then he would have the secretary clip those stories, staple them to a letter. This is all by mail. Mail it to the borough president, mail it to the city council, mail it to the mayor's office, and then wait for them to respond. And he kept a grid on the wall to see who responded.
I love this.
And 2 weeks later, he'd be like, todavía no han respondido, you know.
Llama esta gente.
But then if they did clean up the lot, he would send a photographer, look, they did the job, you know, thanks for the community. And so the community, you know, is a community paper in that sense. The community really relied on us to kind of fight their battles. And so even though that wasn't strictly journalism, I love that. I love that, you know, that you're working as an advocate, you know, of your community, and that they see El Diario as a strong champion. In fact, on the cover of the paper, it said Campeón de los Hispanos. So you gotta, you know, you gotta live that. So,
and you know, it's one of those original, you know, outlets and publications that really gave us a voice, you know, because we didn't have all, you know, all the outlets that we have now.
Yes.
It's just like, vamos a buscar el diario. ¿Qué dice el diario? Pick it up before you come home. You know, the importance of el diario must be studied. And, you know, it was Puerto Ricans, it was Mexicans, it was Colombianos. It didn't serve one particular country. It was just so
from
many.
everywhere.
It was all of us.
Yes. And we celebrated the, you know, we also celebrated the
How many years?
the victories. So El Diario is now, I left on the 100th anniversary, which was 13 years ago. So El Diario is now 113. Now it's online, and there's some copies. But it, you know, it's all those years, right? All the people who came before us who were also at El Diario. Our files before I left, and as we celebrated the 100th anniversary, we gave all the files to El Centro, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, which is part of Hunter College. And we had another collection to Columbia University. And so the history is out there, you know, of everything, you know, that was documented by El Diario.
It must be preserved.
It has to be preserved. It's part of our history. And also, you know, people who came to El Diario, especially who worked as journalists, but also who worked in sales and other departments, they were immigrants who couldn't practice their craft anywhere else, right, if they didn't speak English. And so El Diario gave them that opportunity. There's a guy who Jose Martí was his name. He's a photographer, and El Centro just published a book with all his photography. He documented the life of bodegas and bodegueros, how the bodegas went from being owned by Spanish people to then Cubans to then Puerto Ricans, and then Puerto Ricans to Dominicans. And Dominicans came in and they said, oh no, we're going to turn this into a chain, you know. But mostly Puerto Ricans and Cubans, they just lived off the bodega. You know, it was just a means, you know, a livelihood. But the Dominicans, you know, having that immigrant experience and being, you know, entrepreneurial, they're like, oh, we're going to turn this into a chain. And, you know, and then they did. And now in the last few years, they've been selling to other immigrant groups. So the history of the bodega is also a history of our people and of our communities.
And that's a book.
And that's a whole book. It's a little book. It's a picture book, but it's a beautiful book. It is sold by El Centro right now.
And it tells a story. And it tells a story about our city, about our people, but more importantly, about our hustle and our drive.
Yes.
Like, to come to this country and not speak a language and become a business owner and to flourish and buy a home. Like, I say it all the time. You know, we have people that are born and raised here that will not achieve not even 50% of what some of our immigrants.
Isn't that something?
But it's amazing to me. My sister, she owns an accounting firm, and most of her clients are Latinos. And these numbers that she talks about, and this company made $2 million. And I'm like, she's like, and the owner doesn't even speak English. And I'm like, that drive that we have is different. Y no porque yo soy Latina, but we put in that work. When we say we're going to build something, we put in that work.
Yes. And I think it also builds a profile. So people think, you know, if you don't speak English, you can't make it in, you know, in this country. And I'm like, that's not true. Because I got whole neighborhoods in Queens and everywhere that will prove you wrong. And so, you know, Americans have this sense of what it takes to be successful here. But when you see any of our parents, you know, El Diario has this women's luncheon, and you know, you see women all the time. They bring their moms, and the moms are like, you know, they worked in a factory, but they produce 5 kids, and among the 5 kids, they have 12 degrees. And so the honoree, who is her daughter, was like, my mom has 12 degrees. And so, you know, we see the examples of that immigrant spirit, and so we have a positive image of what immigrants are. So that goes against all that's being projected, right, in media.
And we're fighting right back against it. You know what I'm saying? It's great that you mentioned degrees, because I was just in my mom's house in Florida 2 weeks ago, and the only things hanging up around her house are degrees. Her degree, my sister's degree, my degree, my brother's degree. Like, and she's, you know, she's an immigrant. She never even learned English, but like you said, she produced 5 kids, and everyone went on to become college graduates, business owners, successful, all of them in their own right. So it's true what you say, you know. You can build, and don't get me started, my mother. Esa mujer, she owns houses, she owns apartments, she owns land.
Yeah. They save money.
Oh.
They save cash.
You crazy. That woman owns cows, de todo. She's about her
Yes.
money, and she never spoke English. Never.
Yes. So that, that belies all that is assumed about us. But I think part of our challenge is we haven't told the stories, right? We haven't taken time because we're too busy living life, and and sometimes we think those stories are not worthy, but people need to find comfort, in those stories also, because they're examples of triumph, and they're triumphs against, struggles that you and I know,
Mm-hmm.
the stories. But I think we have to take the time to tell them.
Bronx attitude. I was so happy. I don't know, when I saw the email and everything, I was like, this is somebody I need to talk to. And we have a lot of similarities, and like, not just the journalism, not just the media. I'm also a criminal justice major, and it's crazy because I went backwards. I was like, I'm gonna work for the government. I'm gonna be a police officer. I'm gonna be a crime victim specialist, and it was just like I was so laser focused on working in and then media came. Somebody's like, you want to apply for this job? And my whole life changed. So I did it backwards. It's like I was like, I still love the criminal justice system, and I still, every now and then I'm like, maybe I should go back. I have to find a way to marry the two.
Wow, I can give you many ideas.
That's why I was like, I was so
because
excited.
I think media is also important for changing. I mean, my interest in criminal justice came because as a journalist and working all those years at El Diario and as a journalist telling stories even in television, I just had an assumption that justice was fair. And then the moment I discovered that there was unfairness, and I decided, okay, how do we fix that? And so I became involved in reentry and work with organizations and I was a volunteer and a fundraiser, organizations that were helping people come back from prison. And I don't know, again, sometimes you just, you come into a room and you're like, okay, this is what I want to do. And I love the process of helping people come back from the worst thing they ever did, right? But in that you learn about the system, how the system is not fair, and how there were people in prison. If everybody was in prison for the same amount of time for the same crime, I'm cool. But that's not true. It all depended on where you came from and, what judge you got, and all. It's like a crapshoot. And so I said, oh my God, my people have been unfairly affected by our criminal policies, our crime policies, our policing and all of that. And that made me, start to think about, a career where I could help to fix that system. And it took a long time because, I'm a journalist. How do you transition, to something else? But I think criminal justice reform and bringing fairness into all those systems can only be done with good media work, with public messaging. Because in fact, in this country, to change anything, you need public support, and you need to educate the public, you need to educate policymakers, and you need to have stories of success and all of that. And so thankfully for the last 10 years, I've been involved in that work. The last 10 years I've been in government, I've been involved in that work, and I've seen, I've been able to see kind of the fruits of that labor. But I went to that purposely because for me, it's also at the core a matter of fairness. So when you discover, for example, that in the 80s, all these people were arrested who were really addicts, who shouldn't have been in prison, how that impacted the Latino community is that, we thought there was something wrong with our cousins. There was something wrong with our men, who were incarcerated, and our families judged them harshly, right? And then now you find out, and there's empirical data to show that they were mistreated and that they were harshly sentenced, and you don't get that back. You don't get that time back, and you don't get those relationships back. Grandmothers who died without seeing their, grandchildren again. And so for me, if we're doing the work we're supposed to be doing in government, we also have to make repairs, in those communities and then educate folks so that stuff doesn't happen in the future. So the marriage of criminal justice and media is inevitable.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Because with these stories, media sometimes, creates the narrative. And the same way you can create a negative narrative, you can create a positive narrative.
Yes, you can tell people's real stories. And we have so many examples of people who have been in the system and come back, and they make the best use of their second chance. So that's my next book. It's going to be about reentry.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in contact with Shaka Senghor. I don't know if you know who he
Yeah.
is. You know, he's a published author. He's a friend to our building. You know, he's been up at Power 105.1 several times, and you know the way that he has re-entered society and just changed his life and for the better. I believe in people being able to live a totally different life after prison. And I also believe a lot of people were dealt a bad hand, unlawfully targeted, especially here in New York in our inner cities, where the color of your skin or the clothes that you're wearing or the car that you're driving can get you into a situation with police. Like, that shit is wrong.
Yeah. And we're in a position to fix that. And so, and media is part of, helping to fix that. So I'm so glad to hear you say that. But that's my next book, my present book.
Let's talk about Bronx Attitude.
Yeah, let's talk about Bronx Attitude.
Now, you're also lecturer, you're a mom, you're a wife. How do you handle so much? And when do you have time just for you?
Well, it's funny because my cousin, he stayed with us a lot throughout the years, and he would see me reading on the weekend, and he's like, "Why are you working?" And I'm like, "I'm not working, I'm reading." But in fact, or my mom, when I talk to my mom on the phone, she's in Florida. She's like, "I want you to retire so you could enjoy your life." And I was like, "Mom, I'm enjoying my life. Like for me, it's not. I consider myself fortunate, right? I mean, I worked hard, but I've been in roles that I just absolutely love, and I got to do the work I love. So for me, it hasn't been work. It has been like a life, a mission, right?
You've enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it immensely, and I've enjoyed, opening doors for others and using the power of when I was in media. So I don't see it as a burden, but, that whole issue of balance. I mean, I have 2 kids. They're adults now. We're a close family. You need people along the way. I didn't do it alone, right? I have a husband. We were partners. And family, and sometimes stuff fell to the floor, and then you pick it up and you keep on going. But it was important for me. I knew at a certain age I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to, I didn't want to forget to have a family, right? Because I worked in media. I was sometimes the only woman, and then the women who I knew were single for a long time. I mean, I got married at 29, so by Puerto Rican standards, that was late.
Estaba quedada tú ya a los 29.
Yes, exactly. My cousins already had kids,
Dije, pero ven acá, Rosana, ¿cuándo tú te vas a casar? But you were so focused on study, career.
Yeah, all that took. So I got married.
Like
I had my son at 30.
Which is young now, but back in the days,
exactly.
Olvídate. Pero una vieja a los 30, now 30 is
and my daughter at 33, so I'm like, but it worked out fine. I have, great kids. And you just do, some days job takes precedence, and some days kids take precedence. And, the goal is to be in a position where you have enough flexibility to decide what's important, right? And to say, okay, today I'm going to be super mom. But, I guess my kids are the ultimate judges. I think I'm a great mom, but I think, my kids are the ultimate judges. And also, when you're Latina, you have such intense pressure from all sides, right? To be a professional, be a great mom, be a good cook, kind of keep it all together.
Tiene que estar linda también.
And have your hair done. You know how many times at El Diario I would be on television and I would get a call at the office from women, readers who say, "Nena, tú tienes que hacerte el pelo," And I'm like, I cannot believe the pressure. Or
can we stop down for a minute and talk about the pressures of being a journalist, of being in front of the camera, and not only having to be smart, knowledgeable, deliver, but also be bella también. Te quieren linda, tiene que estar pintada, tiene que estar arreglada. Like, I hate that pressure.
Yes, people would leave messages saying, you shouldn't wear that color. That doesn't look good on you. And so, a lot of energy is put on you when you're in the public eye. Or, on the weekend I'd be at a supermarket and people would stop me and say, the story, you should do a story on this and this and that. And I'm like, I'm with my kids. I'm trying to pick a cereal, So in many ways, when you work in these jobs, people feel ownership.
Yeah.
Over you. And it's hard to say no, right? Because, in a restaurant and people, can I take a picture and all that? I mean, after a while, I never said no because I also feel,
I was just going to ask, did you take them all?
I did. And I think today I would be like, listen, I'm with my family, But, you don't want to be rude.
Did you feel so grateful for your success that you were like, I owe it to this person to take this photo?
I think so. I think sometimes it was that, kind of the obligation. And because sometimes my family would be like, well, tell them to leave you alone. And I'm like, well,
How can we?
We're at the service of this community. I mean, sometimes people are rude, but in general, we understand that our community did not have the traditional access, right, that other people had. And so in many ways, we were their connection to helping resolve an issue, or we were their connection. We were their celebrities, right? And so I think it's important, right, to be cooperative. I think today, as I'm older, I'm not afraid to be rude and say, listen, call my office. But, most of the time, like you said, I felt like I owed them something. I owed them my service. And that, comes from being, someone who believes in service to the community and knows that they don't have, right, access to people in power.
But, for sure, I feel the same way. Even when I go out and I take every picture, I talk to every person. I'm just so grateful for this opportunity. And, sometimes it comes from us being Latinos and not expecting big, great things to happen for us. That it's just like, what do you want, a picture? Sure. Your kid, bring them, So it's actually, it's a sign of character for us. It's just that gratitude. I don't call it imposter syndrome. I call it gratitude.
I think that's true.
Now, Bronx Attitude is self-published?
Yes. I decided to self-publish because, I wrote most of this book during the pandemic, and then it kind of sat on the shelf. I sent it out to publishers or agents, and people gave me opinions, and I was like, I just let it sit for a minute. But then a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I had a stroke.
Please stop.
I had a stroke. And I was in the back of an ambulance, and instead of thinking about my parents and my children, I was like, me voy a morir sin publicar el libro. I was not in danger of dying, but I didn't know it at the moment. And I said, I'm not going to, as I came out of that, in recovery and then learned to take better care of myself.
I'm happy you're here with us.
I said I wanted to self-publish because I never done anything entrepreneurial, but also I wanted my story out while I was alive. And I lost, after the, they call it a mini stroke, and the neurologist is like, a stroke is a stroke. But I lost all that fear that I had before about the book, and I was like, I got to tell the story. So that's also important to me, that I decided to self-publish out of that experience, and I'm saying I'm not going to go through third parties to decide if this is worthy. My story is worthy, and I want to tell it. So now I'm selling books, and I'm promoting the story, and it's an important moment for me, right? Because it means that I'm also a survivor, and I guess I care less about whatever I was worried about before, right? Because I'm happy to be here, and I'm already thinking about my next book, so I'm excited to let people know. Yes, so March 18th it goes on. The ebook is on sale through the Amazon, so we want to get #1, bestseller on Amazon, and then 2 days later the paperback and hardcover are available.
Are we doing audio?
Oh yes, we're doing an audiobook, but I don't know if the audiobook is maybe 2 weeks behind, 2 weeks later or something like that.
Did you record it already?
Yes.
Okay, so the worst is over. Okay,
yes.
You had to do the book.
Yeah.
A Bronx Attitude. I'm so proud of you, and I keep looking to the side because I keep looking at the cover, and it's just, your face tells me everything I need to know. You just look so, just so strong and powerful, but at the same time so loving. And now that you share that, you're a survivor, it makes total sense. This book has to be out here. We've got to know your story. And not only do we have to know your story, we have to know your story while you're still here, while we can still give you your flowers, while people like me can say, Rossanna, thank you for leading the way. Thank you for opening the doors. Thank you for paving that road, that bumpy ass road. Because I, as a Dominicana, working at a hip hop station and working for iHeartMedia, probably wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for women like you, in the 80s and the 90s, making room, being like, excuse me, I need to get my recorder in here too.
That's true.
100%. You paved the way. You opened those doors for women that look like me, and for women that come from families like the one I come from, because this didn't happen for us all the time.
No. And again, that's why the book is important to me, but the book is also a tool. I want to get into, we're going to go on a speaking tour. We want to go and speak to groups of Latinas everywhere and women in general, and talk about, how we got here and why it's important to hold that space, and also to remind people the history, like, in the 80s when I was coming on, being here in the studio with you, that wasn't a slam dunk, that had to be fought for, and here you are. And we're so proud, also of the spaces that you hold. But we have to let folks know how to get there, right? It's not a how-to. It's more like, here's how I did it, and here's how we band together, and we have support. And, when you call on your community for support, they always come through.
Tell me how I can enter, additional rooms that still to this day are not meant for me. That's something, that's something that I speak about all the time. And I tell people, take up space, but it's not as easy as just saying it. How do we, muscle our way into these rooms?
Yes, I think there's several ways. I would say there's several ways to do it, but at the kind of where to start is, you have to take some time, whether you take a weekend or you take, you find the space and you bring in a few people who you trust, and maybe some people who you don't know, and you kind of have a strategy session. So, usually you probably get, let's say, 100 invitations a week to a whole bunch of different things, right? And so you and your staff will sit there and you'll start picking what you want to do, right, over the next 3 months. But I think it's important. One thing I learned in my career is this: forget about the invites you got. Let's think about the invites you haven't had, and where are the spaces you want to be in. And then let's map that out. And then let's see who we know.
Strategy.
Then you bring in the folks and like, who knows who and how do we get there? I want to be the commencement speaker at X school next year because that's important to me for whatever the reason is. And then we figure out how to get you there. But you can't, but you got to pull in the posse, right? And you got to bring Rosanna, you got to bring other people and say, who do we know? I'm on the board of CUNY. I'm on the board of trustees of CUNY right now. So
let's connect the dots.
Yeah, you connect the dots. And then I believe that if you think long and hard and you talk to enough people, you will always find someone who knows someone who can get you there. But most of us never take the time to do that strategy. We just pick from the invites we got. And I think it's important to kind of look up and say, well, I want to be invited to that thing. And then we figure out how to get there.
Can we touch on not being afraid to ask and reach out to the people we know? Because that's something I struggle with. A mí no me gusta molestar la gente. I know everybody. I can probably make everything happen. I'm like, I know. I don't want to bother them. They're always busy. Oh, he works for Google. He doesn't have time to pick up the phone. Or he works for Spotify. Él está busy.
And that's true.
Can we talk to our listeners right now about breaking through?
Yes, you break through. And I learned that, I learned that from other people. People, when I was Secretary of State, people call me all the time to ask for favors. So I learned from them. I learned from the gringos. They call you and they ask you for a favor. And then is implicit, right, that I'm going to owe you one. And they're very bold-faced about it. And I was like, I want to do that too. So we have to get over that, that everybody's busy. But I discovered two things. One is 9 times out of 10, people are happy to help you, right?
That's good to know.
And they're also happy to have you owe them one. That's the social capital of the world. And so you never know when they're going to come and, cobrar, but usually it's something that you can deliver, right? So that is the way of the world. I mean, I have family members who are like, no, I want to do this on my own. I'm like, you could do it on your own, but everybody else ask for my help. So, and that's what I'm here for. And so we have to be more comfortable. And I bet you there are people, in your own organization that if you ask them, they would be so thrilled, but you just haven't made the ask. So I think it just, we have to pull ourselves out, or like take a 3-day weekend, to think about it and whiteboard it and say, here's what I would ask of ABC. And then sometimes it takes a while to get there, but people will be happy to get you into the rooms that you want to get into. That's what I learned. And we just have to ask.
It's crazy that you say that, because the podcast is nominated for an iHeartRadio Podcast Award. And it was a bunch of people that I don't even know who they are that nominated us. Yeah. And that
you never know who's watching you.
And I put that put so much into perspective, because I was like, and who nominated us? They were like, executives, producers, fellow podcasters. I'm like, how? So it goes right with what you're saying. You never know who's going to help you. You just have to ask.
Yeah, and then sometimes people say, well, I don't know, but let me think about who I know. And it's just that, that whole way of networking that I learned also as as I grew in my career. I sought advice from people, and and I learned how to ask. And usually you're asking for someone else, right? Which is easier. But when it comes to asking for ourselves, and so, I remember getting invites to be a commencement speaker at several schools, and I was like, I don't want to speak there. I want to speak there. And then I picked up the phone, and I said to someone, I really want to be the speaker. And it took like 2 years to what I really wanted, but I got there,
Where was it?
I can't say.
Come on, what you mean you can't? It already happened. You can tell me.
I know, but they don't know that.
Oh, they don't know that. Okay, got it.
They don't know that I strategized to
Ahorita,
get there.
ahorita me dice, ahorita me
Yeah.
dice. When we're off the air, you tell me.
But I think it's worth, again, I learned that lesson also through coaching, through one of my coaches. But he said, you're only looking at the invites you got, not the ones you didn't get. And I was like, So I try on a yearly basis to take this weekend where I just strategize, okay, where do I want to be? What are the spaces I want to be in? And then I work to get there, using the people that I know.
I feel like that's going to be this weekend. I have a free weekend.
Whenever you want. And then you let people know. You let a select few people know. So then everybody's looking out. It's like everybody's looking out. Oh, here, here's the person who knows someone. And, people, you already are an award-winning, in your field. You're already highly regarded. And you probably use that to help other people. But we got to use that to help you.
We created this podcast just to help other people. Whether it's a book, a movie, we've had directors, we've had actors, rappers, singers, politicians, senators, like anybody who is Latino or a friend to the Latino community and needs support or needs help amplifying a message. This is what this is for. This is not for me. This is not for me. This is for you.
Yeah.
When they reached out, I was like, you know what? Rossana Rosado and a Bronx attitude. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this book.
Yes. And like I said, I want to go, I want to do the speaking tour. I want to go speak to groups of people, especially groups of women and groups of college students. Because, even when I was in college, like I tell the story in the book, I went to college only a half hour away from home. So I lived in the Bronx. I went to college in Westchester. It was as far as my parents would let me go. And I went to this campus in White Plains, and people were like, where you from? And I would say the Bronx. And then they'd be like, yeah, but where you from originally? And I would be like, the Bronx. And people were like so interested in what my background was.
They wanted you to say I'm Puerto Rican.
Yeah. Or they felt like I looked exotic or something. But I'm like, I'm only a half hour from home. How do I still have culture shock? And it's in the 80s. And so.
How people, let me look at this picture. Que tú eras linda.
But, even till today, our kids still experience that kind of culture shock when they go to these, college towns. And so I think it's important, as I go out to, across the country to talk about the book and also to talk about those experiences so that they know that we went through that and that stuff can be overcome. Like I said earlier, our community comes from an extreme struggle and sacrifice. But there's no reason for kids to go through what I went through if we're in a position to help them, right? To help them get through those college years, to help them kind of plan. When I was teaching at John Jay, sometimes I had to speak to parents, right? Because they were like, especially with girls, she was supposed to go to class and come home because she had other responsibilities at home. But then she could go 4 years without actually talking to a professor or being involved in extracurriculars. And those are important when you're trying to get a master's or an advanced degree. So our community, our girls, especially Latinas, but also the broader communities of color, they still need us.
Oh, 100%.
They need us. And so I want to use the book as a way to get to them and to be able to speak to them and to say, girl, we took the journey and we're here and we're here for you and we need more of you, to take that journey.
And it's all about relatability. It's like, I feel like I can relate to you. If I feel like you don't understand what I went through, I'm immediately going to create a block. With you, there's no block. I could talk to you about anything.
Yes, we can talk about anything.
It could be career. It could be familia. It could be growing up in New York. And with younger people, I've always said that I connect good with younger people, but it's always because they can relate.
They want to be heard.
Oh, 100%.
Right? And then I travel across the state, in my present job with all these kids, kind of in the criminal justice vein. And they want to be seen, and in many ways the adults around them either don't want to see them, don't want to hear them because they're noisy, and I'm like, we have to, to me, every child is our child, right? And they want to feel that, and they don't always feel that from adults, right? They're being judged, or they're being criticized, and sometimes we just have to stop and listen to them, because everybody didn't have my upbringing, and surrounded by love, but we can fill in those gaps as a community, as people in business. And we also, get our businesses to support that work, to support our going into the community and, and being those examples of success, because they need that, they need those stories. So now, my new evangelizing is around getting people to tell their
I
stories.
love this. I love this. I saw that it said workshop, right? How to get started on your story. And I feel like a lot of us have a story to tell and want to tell our story, but we don't know where to start. Where would I
Yes,
start?
people get hung up on the writing
With a
part.
notebook? I was just going to say that. Do I get a notebook?
Yeah, people get hung up on the writing, and I'm like, listen, you have so many apps now that you could just speak. If you have an hour commute in your car, you could every day tell yourself a story by on this audio app, and then that comes to you, written, the app turns it into whatever. And then when you have time, you sit down and you try to put it together into a story, or you hire someone, to do the writing. Most people find writing hard, right? For me, writing has always been, that's my thing. But for most people, writing is hard. So I'm like, don't think about the writing, just think about the stories. Like, tell the story, what happened to you, on the way to the ball, or, tell the stories, and then eventually you string them together, right? Tell the stories of your family, because people don't know how they got here. When I was in class with my students, my college students, they didn't know why their families were here. And I used a book called Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez, who is a journalist for many years. And it's really the story of Latin American countries. And so half of the students, they didn't know why their parents came here. Dominican students didn't know the history of Trujillo, because that's not something people don't talk about at home. And so in telling those stories, we also tell the story of how people came to be here, how American policies forced people to be here. And so, everybody has some kind of story. And I think it's important just to use what what the technology we have to start to tell the story. And then we'll worry about writing it and turning it into a book or a movie or whatever it's going to be.
How did you pick, like, the specific parts of your life that you were going to share on?
I mean, there was a lot more before I edited it down. But I really wanted people to know my childhood, because I wanted to show a different view of how we grew up, in the Bronx. And
Please and thank you.
And yes, I wanted them to know that there were different stories than what's out there, in movies. Secondly, I wanted to tell the story of my career, because I entered spaces that I wasn't supposed to be entering, or, I guess I was bold enough to be in, with no compass, right? With nobody in my family who had ever been through college. I don't even know how I got through the application process.
I know, right? You did your own.
So, when you're young, you just enter spaces, boldly. And I wanted people to know that. And then the third part was, I didn't want to write a book about El Diario, because the Diario story belongs to a lot of people. But my experience at El Diario was unique, and also, went through several eras. So I wanted to tie that all together. I wanted this to be a New York story. And that's why I called it Bronx Attitude, because I'm from the Bronx. But it's a New York story, and it's a New York story of success. And I wanted that to be part of, whatever you Google on New York City, I want it to be a part of that story, because I am a part of that story.
Sure. You're part of the fabric, of what makes our city so amazing. And your story is a story that, it's going to connect with so many of us, the children of immigrants, you know what I'm saying? The Latina, the journalists, the wanting to transition to a totally different career, because I am still so, I don't want to use the word surprised, but I'm just like in awe. Okay, you did this whole journalistic career, and then you ended up a New York State commissioner for the criminal justice service. Like, how does one do that?
Well, it wasn't a straight line, but I knew when when it's time to leave, and I knew I wanted to leave El Diario. It took me about 2 years to do so, but I was already in love with the work of criminal justice, but I didn't have a way to enter that space. So anyway, I left. I taught for 2 years, and then the governor had offered me a job at the time, but I didn't want to work for the state. And he said, if you want to help 10 people a year, that's nice, but if you want to help thousands, you got to come to government. So then when I decided to come to government, he said, well, the job is Secretary of State. And within that job, I found ways to work in criminal justice.
That's a beautiful title.
And then while I was secretary, I decided to go back to school, and I went to John Jay. I did my online, I did my master's in criminal justice. So I said, if I'm going to work in criminal justice, I want to have the vocabulary. So I did that. And then, when Kathy Hochul became governor, she asked me if I was interested in DCJS, and I was interested in the Division of Criminal Justice Services. So, and I've been there for 4 years now, really working on, we fund all the folks who do work in criminal justice. So, if you speak your dream, it took a decade, right? But if you speak your dream and you're confident, I think the stars align, and you get to do the work. So it is another career, but for me, it's been one long journey to use my journalism experience to continue to tell the stories of people who have come back from the system, and to also, help communities heal from all that damage. When the governor came to power, the shootings were high. It was right after the pandemic, and so our first job in the first 2 years was to bring those shootings down. And now we're all taking a victory lap because we're at record lows in crime. And what that allows to do us now is to really look at preventive and all of that. But I wrote this book because I wanted to remind people that we all have a story, and that story is important to tell, and that no matter what the work you're doing, I think our young people also, we're saying to 18-year-olds, pick a career. And now that you're older, you're like, how can you make a decision at 18 about what you want to do the rest of your life? And so, again, this is a memoir. It's not a how-to, but I want people to find things that resonate, and have the courage to make decisions for themselves, whether that is a new career or that is, an extension of the same career, or that, they're starting at the beginning, that they know that there are people that they can look up to and that they can ask for advice.
We're here for a reason today. I want you to know that. Now, will you be able to stay in government with the book and go on the road, do, speaking engagements and, a book tour? How would that work? How do you see that working?
Well, I mean, I have a full-time job. Mm-hmm. And so like many people, from the people we've been discussing, today, we find time for the stuff we love. So, I can take time off and I can do, promotions. I mean, this book ends when I left El Diario, so it doesn't involve my state service. And so you take one hat off and you put one on, but at the end of the day, it's kind of one big thing. I have great support from my colleagues in government, to be able to tell this story. And again, we tour weekends. We're doing everything possible to cover ground. But I love my day job, and
you make a difference. And that is why you love it, because you're touching thousands, like you said. You're helping make a difference. You matter.
Yes, and we're helping everyone in the space, from law enforcement to community groups, and so I think that's really important work, and it's not in conflict with my past life, but also I think it's important for people to know that you have all the facets that you have in your life. So I mean, there's no conflict, with my government job, but also I want people to know that I have different, facets in my life. So. And many of us, right? Many of our folks have that. They can own a business and still be studying something else or be pursuing a passion. And I think our kids, our young people also need hope that, that they can pursue passions, that sometimes what you want most in life doesn't make sense to anyone else. And that's okay.
Go for it.
Yes, go for it and ask for help.
Because it is here. And, I want to take a moment, and just thank you for sharing your story. Thank you so much for coming here today. And, thanks for leading in the way that you have, with respect, with grace, with education. You embody so many, of the qualities that I've always sought to have in my own life. And, I just met you now, but I feel like you're somebody that I would love to keep as part of my circle, because I'm like, wow, she's done everything that I've either wanted to do or I've already done.
And that you will do.
And there's a lot. We're gonna tell my story. We're gonna figure out, and that's another thing. You're gonna be helping people tell their story also. How do you see this? How are we making this happen?
I'm gonna, I'm working on a kind of curriculum, but in the speaking engagements, we're gonna turn some of those really into workshops to get people started on writing their story for themselves. And,
well, I'm coming to a workshop.
Yes, and to also make it, make it look easier, than perhaps what they think. And people think about writing a book, it seems overwhelming, but if you just talk about like 3 stories that impacted you, and then you start to build around that, then you get there. And sometimes you might want to, how people they write a cookbook just to share with their family. I did that several years ago, and you could do that to share with a small group, or you could do that to take your story public.
It's cool that you say that, because director Elaine Del Valle, she wrote a book, Bronxville bred.
Yes, and she wrote a film and everything. I know
exactly.
my son worked with her at one time.
So she sat right here and she said the same thing. She said you pick 3 to 5 very like marking moments in your life and you build from there. And you just said the same thing she said. So you know what? If you're listening, there you go. Go back, listen to Elaine Del Valle's episode after you finish listening to, Rossana Rosado's episode right now, and get started on your book too.
Get started on your story.
There you go. Boom. And your story. When does it drop? Let the listeners know when they can pick it up.
Yes. So March 18th, we're on Amazon. You can get the ebook for $1.99, and we want to make, top bestseller on Amazon. And
$1.99 what?
$1.99 is the ebook.
Oh, listen, we're gonna sell
on that day,
all the ebooks
from 11 to 1 is the key time, and the Eastern time.
We gotta promote this.
But then 2 days later, on the 20th, the paperback and the hardcover are also available on Amazon, and I have a website, bronxattitude.com, so you can come there for all the news, and you can also, as of the 20th, be able to buy the book directly from me on the website.
And there you have it, Bronx Attitude, Rossana Rosado. Thank you so much for stopping by today.
Thank you for having me,
and thank you for sharing your story. Gracias. Come again.
Thank you. I will.